Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Leeds Central. And I agree with a lot of what he said, in particular his focus on affordability for the people that we represent in this House. And I will make sure that my remarks address that point. The first thing that we all have to remember is that we are all on the same side. We're all on the same side in this bill. There is huge cross-party support with what we are trying to do. And to be more precise, what we know is that for a cleaner, more renewable, cheaper energy system, cheaper to the people that we represent, we need to electrify as much as we can, and electrify as much as we can, and produce that electricity with as much green energy as possible. And indeed, that does include nuclear power to make sure that we have that base load there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about cost, because too much of this debate, until the Right Honourable Gentleman's speech, has not really looked at the fact that unless our constituents can pay their bills, unless businesses can afford to run their businesses in an affordable way, not only do we not have a thriving economy, but we do not have a thriving society. So in order to reduce those costs, we know over the long term what we need to do, but we are in a transition. And I will repeat some of the points that I made intervening on the Shadow Secretary of State, particularly in relation to gas, because we all support moving to a net zero future. But in the transition to that point, we are going to need, and this bill, I think, needs to do more in this regard, even more than it already does, to expand gas storage capacity in this country, to actually expand our refining capacity in oil as well. Why? Not because I want to burn fossil fuels, but because in the transition, as we get to the place that we know we need to get to, and we can argue about how best we achieve that, if our constituents see their bills going through the roof, the support for the net zero agenda will plummet. So what I am concerned about is making sure that as we go through this transition, we keep the bills down for our constituents, at the same time as making the investments that we need to make for the longer term. Other members of the House have brought up the fact of the need to invest in our grid. I think it was the Right Honourable Member for Kingswood who said, you know, it's ridiculous if you've got over a decade, if you're trying to plug in new renewable energy into our grid system. What I'd like more clarity on from the Minister and indeed the government as we go through this is how the measures here practically will increase the investment in the grid, the speed with which that will happen, because we really don't have forever to wait, because all of us will hear examples, either from our own constituencies or elsewhere, of that huge delay. And all of our strategies, all of our policies do not mean anything unless we can get them plugged into the grid. So I think that is something that requires real urgency, and I look forward to the government explaining further in that regard. And two further points. The first is EPC standards. It's a small thing on some level, but actually it really matters. Because anybody who owns a home, who wants to do the right thing, who can afford to make those investments to make their home more energy efficient and indeed to reduce the cost of their bills, and why shouldn't they invest to reduce the cost of their own bills? The EPC as we currently have is not fit for purpose. We all know that. And so I'd like more clarity on how we're going to improve that, and to clarify an updated EPC, is that going to be focused on the environmental aspect or the bills aspect or both, and how that will come up? Because I think that unless we can do that, businesses and individuals and communities around the country will not know what they need to do, the investments they need to make and when, in order to reduce the cost of their energy and to reduce the cost on our climate. And the final point I wanted to make was about this Independent Systems Operator and Planner, ISOP. I don't want to bore the House, but I do think the detail in this regard is important. Because, and I mentioned it to the Secretary of State I intervened on him in his speech. In clause 123, sections, parts 1 and 2, it explains that the ISOP must have regard to the strategic policy statement issued by the government. And then the second clause then says, well, if it can't achieve a policy aim, then what it should do is explain why and how. I actually think we need to beef this up. We need to explain more precisely that when the strategic policy statement is made by government, ISOP will be a delivery mechanism, nothing more. Because what I fear, this is not the intention of the government, nor indeed anybody in this House, what I fear is, unless we can make that clearer, we end up with a potential outcome whereby Ofgem is maybe doing one thing, ISOP is thinking it's doing something slightly different, and the government's strategic intention is something different again. And I think that that is something that we should look at in committee stage. I should have said I should draw the House's attention to my spot on the Register of Interest as chair of the Regulatory Reform Group in that regard. But overall, I support the bill. It's a good bill, and I'm very glad we have cross-party support on it.